Okay, so this is the palpating the transverse processes of the cervicals. So your partner is supine. Place your fingers on the sides of the neck below the earlobes. Using your flat thumb pads, slide anteriorly
Thumb or index finger.
and posteriorly to feel the ridge of the transverse processes. Explore the length of the neck.
Okay, so here's the earlobe. Here's the mastoid process right here. I'm going to slide directly inferior to that, and I'm going to gently do a forward and backwards, or anterior, posterior. As I slide down more inferior, it's easier to palpate, okay? Because the transverse processes become more prominent as I get lower. But you're also, remember, palpating through muscle tissue, sternocleidomastoid, and some of the other muscle tissue, okay? Go ahead,
And
Ralph.
it says you might not feel the tips of individual processes, but the ridge formed by the transverse processes beneath the overlying tissue. All right, next you're going to rotate the head 45 degrees to the right. With the head in this position, the transverse processes form a line from the left mastoid process to the center of the shaft of the clavicle. And you're going to draw an imaginary line from these two landmarks and visualize and palpate the transverse processes along the path.
So I have Sue's head turned. Meg's. And I'm palpating. I'm not pressing hard, but as soon as I press in with my thumb, I hit a hard end, okay? There's still soft tissue over top of it, but I can feel, okay? And the way to check that is slide slightly posterior, and when you sink in, you're gonna sink in a little bit deeper because you're gonna be in what's called the lamina groove, okay? So, if I go to the posterior, here's my spinous process. I slide a ½ inch anterior, lamina groove, then I slide another 1/4 to ½ inch. I'm right on the spinous processes. Go ahead, Rob.
All right. So for this transverse process of C1, you can either be supine or seated. You're going to locate the left mastoid process of the temporal bone and rotate the head 45 degrees to the right. Using your broad finger pad, slide slightly inferior and anterior from the mastoid process. Explore deep to the sternocleidomastoid muscle for the solid bump of the transverse process of C1.
Okay, so mastoid process right here. Okay, if I slide superior, I'm going to bang right into it, just posterior to the earlobe. And then I'm going to go slightly below that, and I'm going to gently roll forward and backwards. Any discomfort there, Sue?
Nope.
How about Meg?
Meg? How about Meg?
Nope.
Okay.
Do you want to look at the cervical lamina groove as well, or go to the next?
Sure.
Okay. Scoop the head with one hand, and with your other hand, locate the cervical transverse processes.
Okay. So we're gonna let the head drop back. Okay. You let your head relax. You let me control it. Okay. So now I'm palpating the cervical spinous processes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And slide posteriorly off the transverse processes.
Okay, I have to slide laterally to get into the lamina groove, right? Why does it say posteriorly?
Well, you should be on the you should be starting with the transverse processes,
okay.
not the spinous.
Sorry about
That's what it was. So you're going to slide posteriorly off the transverse processes and explore the space between the transverse and spinous processes.
Transverse process here. I'm going to slide posterior. I'm going to show you on Mr. Skeleton what we're palpating here. So we have transverse processes. Here's the mastoid process. Slightly below that, I'm going to be C1. Okay. And then as I slide down, remember that when we turn the head 45 degrees, it makes it a little easier, more prominent to palpate these. And then when I slide from the lateral transverse process, posteriorly, we're going to slide into this space here called the lamina groove. Okay? So that's what we're palpating Again, transverse process. There's mastoid process, transverse process, slide 1/4 to 1/2 inch posteriorly right in the lamina groove. And I can slide all the way down. Okay? So you can turn off the video and just play with this a little bit. Okay?